Welcome to Wander Stories, a podcast bringing you stories from destinations around the world or across the street. This is your host, Susan Lanier Graham, publisher of the award-winning online travel magazine, wanderwithwonder.com. In Wander Stories, we go behind the scenes to share some of the wow moments we discover as we travel. My husband Bill and I sometimes find the best stories as we travel across the U.S. in our fifth-wheel trailer. Other times, we might discover stories as we jet off to other locales. But no matter the source or where we go, we love bringing you Wander Stories to help inspire your own travels. So pull up a chair, grab a glass of bubbles or your favorite beverage, and enjoy this episode of Wander Stories. Welcome back to Wander Stories. This week, I'm back home in my RV in Southern California after an amazing week exploring the Christmas markets along the Danube River with Viking cruises. If you didn't follow along with that, check it out on Instagram at Wander with Wonder. So let's jump right into this episode, talking about how rewarding it is to share the love of travel with future generations. My son grew up with a mom who was a part-time travel writer. The rest of the time I taught high school and community college. When he was a kid, Patrick complained, "Mom is always working when we travel." While that was true, he also had some pretty cool experiences. As an adult, he realizes he was very privileged to be able to travel. And he has a little bit of the travel bug in him as well. Let's fast forward a few years, and our grandkids came along at a time when I was then a full-time travel writer. My husband Bill was working for American Airlines, which gave us the benefit of being able to travel on standby anywhere American flies. We had buddy passes we could use for our grandkids, and we did. They all traveled with us from a very early age, exposing them to other places, and the incredible gift of air travel has helped make them the amazing people they are today. Okay, my son and daughter-in-law get most of the credit, but I really believe that exposure to travel has made a difference. And they take road trips with their parents all the time. One of my favorite quotes is from Mark Twain, who said, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness." And many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime. Although written a century ago, it applies today. And I've tried to give that sense of adventure to my son and now my grandkids. I think the best example of this is my oldest granddaughter, Zoe, who is now 16. I started collecting postcards for my grandkids when the oldest was a newborn. I started getting postcards for the other four even before they were born. I wrote a short personal note on the card and put it in a plastic sleeve in a notebook for each child. The kids all loved looking through their travel picture books, as they called them. When Zoe was 3 years old, going on 33, I think, she was flipping through the book one day and looked up at me and said, "Grandma, I want to see the whole wide world with you." Ugh, my heart melted. I knew I was crying as I asked her, "Where do you want to go, Zoe?" So she flipped through the book to a specific page she had in mind and pointed to the Eiffel Tower. "Paris," she said. "I want to go to Paris." From that moment on, we planned her Paris trip. That day, I laughed and told her, "I think we need to make Paris a trip for when you're older. Is there anywhere else you'd like to go?" She thought for a moment and told me, "China. I hear they have a really long wall." Laughed at that one and told her, well, that one's going to have to wait as well. But I did promise her that I would find a place to travel together and that I thought eventually we could figure out Paris. So we did plan a trip, a shorter trip, to see how she liked to travel. We were all living in Phoenix at the time. Las Vegas was only about 45 minutes away. So we flew to Las Vegas with Zoe, and she loved every minute of it. That started Zoe on her love of travel. So then there's Paris. Her entire life, Zoe planned for a trip to Paris. She doesn't recall that conversation from 13 years ago, but she spent a lifetime reading about Paris. She decorated her room with everything Paris. She started learning French on her own, and we knew we would get there one day. In the years between 3 and 13, we traveled together several times. We did local weekends away. When they lived in Missouri, we would pick up the kids and fly them back to Arizona for visits. When Bill and I lived in Dallas for a few years, we flew the kids to Dallas to visit with us. The kids took road trips with their other grandparents, with their parents, to see cousins in California. So they were always going. In 2019, Bill and I took Zoe on a trip to Maine, where we spent a week exploring the Maine coast. And then we were ready for Paris. Zoe was 13, so I felt it was a good time to go. We planned the trip to Paris for October 2020. I had filled out all the paperwork to get her passports. Her parents approved it, and I had started planning the trip. And then March of 2020, and the pandemic. And our plans were again put on hold. I was so upset, but determined we would get to Paris. Our dream, and truly it was as much my dream as Zoe's, became reality in August 2023. I didn't want to go to Paris in August. It's high season and there are always a lot of tourists. But Zoe's now in high school and she doesn't get a fall break. So we planned the trip and we finally made it to Paris. The trip was amazing in so many ways. I had never planned an international trip with a teenager, so I also learned a lot. We were there during high season, so we booked a very inexpensive and very small apartment through Vrbo. I'll put the link to that in today's show notes for the apartment. It was small, but it was in an amazing location, just steps from La Halle train station, and the metro stops at La Halle and Etienne-Marcel. We were just a few blocks from the Louvre and the Seine. This little apartment put us in the heart of Paris's first arrondissement. Some of the things we did were perfect. Others I might do differently next time. One of the best things we did was buy a pass for the metro. We picked it up at the airport before we got on the train, and we bought the 5-day pass. That way we could get on and off the metro anytime. We used that every day we were there, sometimes multiple times a day. On that first day, we took the train from Charles de Gaulle to La Halle, got off, enjoyed lunch, and then walked a couple of blocks to our apartment. We were all exhausted and decided to get some rest before exploring. Our dinner that night was about a 15-minute walk from the apartment at Bouillon Julien. I had heard great things about the restaurant, but we weren't overly impressed. It's in a beautiful Art Deco building. Didn't find the servers overly friendly, but the food was okay and it was really good prices, so it is a good option for a budget trip to Paris. So I'll drop the link for that in today's show notes as well. I think the jet lag was a surprise for Zoe. I had warned her, but I think until you experience it, you don't understand it. She was exhausted the next day. I probably should have given her a day to relax, one of those things I learned. But I wanted to show off Paris, so we set off the next day for our hop-on, hop-off bus tour with Tout Bus Paris. I really recommend this company. I love hop-on, hop-off bus tours. It gives you a chance just to sit, see the city, figure out what you want to do more of while you're on the bus. It's just a really good introduction. Tout Bus has fun, informative tours. Sometimes they're a little bit kitschy, but they were good, and the buses run regularly. We decided to stay on the bus and do the entire 90-minute loop. The ticket is good for 2 days. Now, in hindsight, we probably should have stopped there and returned to our apartment for a rest, but we decided to visit Galerie Lafayette and the shops along Haussmann. It was a fun afternoon, window shopping in the designer rooms inside Galerie Lafayette, with a break to enjoy drinks, mocktails for Zoe, on the rooftop. The next day, Zoe was pretty homesick that morning. In fact, she told me so later that afternoon and apologized for being a bit quiet. I told her no apologies necessary. International flights are hard. And this was her first long flight. But we got up, we left early that morning for our skip the line tour to the Eiffel Tower. Now we're all glad we went up in the tower, but it was a little chaotic. I will likely never do that again. because I actually felt we had just as good a vantage point from the rooftop patio where we had our drinks the day before. That afternoon, Zoe and I went to the Louvre. Ooh, talk about chaos. One of the disadvantages of visiting Paris in August is there are crowds everywhere. We were both disappointed that the Mona Lisa was so small, but glad we saw inside the Louvre, and the expansive museum is impressive. It's massive, and someday I'll return and spend more time exploring. After that one day when Zoe felt homesick, she rebounded and was eager to explore. She got up ready to go. She commented on that first day that navigating the big city was complicated and could be tiring. But after she found her footing, she was eager to go and do more. And about day 3, she started talking about returning to Paris and thinking about how much it would cost to live there. There were a couple of highlights for me on the trip, and I think Zoe and Bill. The day after we had gone up into the Eiffel Tower, we took the metro back across town to see the Eiffel Tower at night. So we got there early evening. We packed a picnic dinner with cheese and meats, bread, cookies, drinks, and wine. We laid out our blankets on the lawn at the Champ de Mars, the gardens that stretch out in front of the Eiffel Tower. We talked and watched people. It was a fun afternoon. 3 hours passed quickly as we anticipated the 9 p.m. lighting of the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower lights up each evening at dusk, sparkling like a beautiful beacon on the horizon. In August, dusk is at about 9 p.m., so we spent the evening anticipating it, and we weren't disappointed. That was probably the best thing about our trip, those unplanned moments. Watching the lighting of the Eiffel Tower and then making our way back across the city on the metro at night, walking down at dusk to the Seine and watching the lights come on around us, strolling through the artisans set up along the river banks and browsing through the paintings and photographs for sale, stopping in for dessert in the shadow of the remains of Notre Dame. We also discovered that we enjoyed hanging out at a local cafe on the corner near our apartment. Florida La Halle is on a busy corner at the edge of the train station. Each morning we stopped in for breakfast, a lovely coffee, a butter croissant or a pain au chocolat, and fresh squeezed orange juice. We would head back in the middle of the afternoon to sit and relax. Remember, our apartment was tiny. There wasn't a lot of space to relax in the apartment. So we would sit at Florida. I would enjoy a glass of Drapier champagne. Bill would order a cola. And Zoe sampled a different mocktail each day. She became quite the connoisseur of mocktails by the end of our trip. It felt like our place, and we enjoyed people watching from the sidewalk tables and chatting with the waiters. One day we all laughed at the birds that feasted on a neighboring diner's table. And people always got off the trains and stopped to snap pictures of the picturesque corner cafe. Zoe enjoyed watching the people, and was impressed that people in Paris seemed all pulled together and took pride in how they dressed. She seemed to notice the little details and talked often about how she would return when she was older. The Sunday before we left, Zoe and I left Bill to wander on his own, and we took a taxi to the Ritz Paris to enjoy afternoon tea at Salon Proust. We were both glad we did. Zoe summarized it best when she said, "I felt pampered and special, but comfortable." That definitely was the vibe. We were special and treated as special guests, but it didn't feel stilted or uncomfortable. It was a delightful couple of hours when we nibbled on a massive assortment of sweets and sipped our tea, and I enjoyed a glass of bubbles. For me, the highlight of the trip was our last day. We had been strolling down one of the boulevards, made our way to the Seine to get one last look. And as we headed back, Zoe hooked her arm inside mine and told me, "Grandma, the next time we come to Paris, I'm bringing you." "Oh, really?" I replied. "Yeah, but I need a few years," she said. "I have to finish high school and college, complete medical school, and establish myself. So give me 15 years. She stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and looked at me, wagging her finger. "You'll be 75, and that's not old. But you'd better stay in shape, Grandma, so we can walk around Paris then like we did this time." I laughed and promised her, I guess our next trip to Paris is once again in the planning stages. All of this made me realize that helping children see the world when they're young makes them unafraid of the unknown. They have the heart of an adventurer. They're eager to try new things and experience the world. They put aside preconceptions and are willing to reach for the unknown. I'm planning trips for the other kids in the years to come, and I look forward to each one. I don't know what tomorrow brings, but I have Paris on my calendar for spring or fall of 2038. I'll leave you with an amazing quote. When you travel with children or grandchildren, you are giving something that can never be taken away. Experience, exposure, and a way of life. Until next time, remember, deciding not to travel with children because they won't remember the trips you take is like saying don't read them books because they won't remember the stories you read. I'll talk to you next time with more Wander Stories. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Wander Stories. Join us next time when we share more stories from around the world or across the street. Until then, check out wanderwithwonder.com for more of my favorite travel destinations. Be sure to check today's show notes for links to give you more information on what we talked about. We love sharing our stories with you. So subscribe to Wander Stories and never miss another episode. We'd love to hear some of your Wander Stories as well, so be sure to share your feedback and drop some notes in the comments. Oh, and remember, share Wander Stories with a friend. Until next time, when we bring you more Wander Stories, I hope you discover some of your own wow moments wherever your travels may take you.